Welcome to Michael Potts Formula One. Everything Formula One, but from a photographer's point of view. Bahrain 2022 Grand Prix review. I'm going to do things a little bit differently from most Formula One review sites. Rather than go about things in a chronological order, or even talk about the main events during the course of the weekend, I'm going to look at a few photographs that I took and tell the story through those. I hope you enjoy it. Carlos Sainz rising over the hill at turn 8. During the course of the race weekend, we have 5 sessions, 5 moments where there's cars on track. There's the race, there's qualifying, and there's 3 practice sessions. I'd used the first practice session to cover action in the pits. That left me 1 session to try and get a few really good on-track daylight shots. And this is one I particularly wanted to get. I knew that there was a very good chance of being able to get a car and a helicopter in the same shot. Bahrain's got a bit of a unique track layout where it's in quite a big open area. There's still some undulation. Putting those together, you can get a scene with a car and a helicopter in the same shot, which is a little bit unusual. I went out to the spot at the start of the session and waited. The cars took a long time to come out of the garage, but the helicopter never seemed to be in sync with them. So I have a car coming over and then the helicopter would pass by, or the helicopter would pass by and there'll be no cars. This went on for about half an hour. That's pretty much half the session gone. All I had was some cars arriving the hill and a few panning shots. At that point, I didn't have my shot. I was about to give up on it when I saw the helicopter coming over the hill. And I thought, I'll give it one more go. And then Carlos came over their edge and I was able to get helicopter and car. And I really liked it because the helicopter is sort of tilting forward as he follows the driver around. Lewis Hamilton arriving at the Bahrain Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton knows how to make a splash when he arrives at the race. He's pretty much the only driver who arrives in anything else other than the team uniform. Every day he arrives in something different. It's usually work by young, up-and-coming design talent, often incredibly special. He'll play with fabrics and colors and prints and shapes, and it's great seeing someone using their platform to promote young talent. Sebastian Vettel was diagnosed with COVID at the start of the race weekend. This unfortunately meant that he could not compete. His place was taken by Nico Hulkenberg. Hulkenberg is an incredibly talented Formula One driver. He has over 180 starts. He's probably most famous for never achieving a podium. He has got a pole position. He's won the Le Mans 24-hour, but somehow bad luck or bad judgment have denied him the opportunity. I secretly hoped that he would do something magical and somehow get his podium. Unfortunately, the Aston Martin was incredibly underwhelming this weekend, and him and his teammates spent most of their time at the back of the grid. At the end of the race, the drivers are interviewed by the international media. I got this photograph of Nico as he was being interviewed by Canal+. What I like about it is there's a sort of ruggedness and kind of this gnarled hero coming out of retirement for one last duel, one last battle. There's a twinkle in his eye where you can see him recapturing the joys of his youth, but there's a disappointment as well in how it's turned out. He didn't quite live up to the expectations that he had for himself. George Russell and Lewis Hamilton in their race gear. It's a bit unusual to see the drivers walking down the pit lane in their race overalls, but also having both drivers in the same frame is quite interesting, and I like the positioning of them. George has just joined the team. He's been a Mercedes development driver for many years, and he's finally got the promotion to the main race seat. He's an incredibly talented driver. He's won pretty much everything he's had a chance to win. It's going to be really good to see how he goes against Lewis. The future hope versus the driver with an incredible legacy. How is George going to take this team on to the next level, and how is he going to wrestle control from Lewis? There's a lot of interesting, fascinating subplots going on between these two. At the moment, they're working very well together, but it's probably easier to work together when you're not fighting for the World Championship. Max Verstappen before the start of the race. I took this photograph in the Red Bull garage just before Max drove off towards the grid. It's a moment of calm before the storm. There's hardly anyone around. A few of the mechanics are busying themselves, but Max is sitting in his car. He's fully focused, and he has this very, very intense stare. I wanted to focus on one eye, just to kind of make the photograph as singularly focused as possible, to get that intensity that he's got, that stare. He's almost staring through the camera. You can just imagine what's going through his mind, pre-living the race, working out his strategy. I feel this is a very powerful image of a motor racing gladiator about to go into combat. This is Lewis Hamilton leaving the pits at free practice 1. A couple of things I really like about this. I quite like this angle. It's a little bit dynamic with the car kind of moving to the side and the positioning of the car and the frame. There's a little bit of an interesting thing on the car. If you look at the top of the roll hoop, there's a camera. Formula One teams distinguish between the two drivers by either having a yellow or black camera mount above the driver's head. It's a very easy way for you to be able to see which driver is at which car. Generally speaking, the lead driver, the number one driver, gets the black camera mount, and the number two driver gets the yellow. Lewis has opted for the yellow in this case. He would have had first choice because he finished the championship higher than George, and he is the established driver in the team. So it's interesting that he has opted for that. Lewis has often raced with a yellow as his helmet, but it's generally been a more of a golden yellow, a bit like Ayrton Senna yellow from the Brazil flag. This year he's gone for a brighter, more vibrant yellow, and it's very, very similar to that used by Valentino Rossi. Now, I'm not sure if this is a reference or a nod to the great motorcyclist. It's a new style departure for Lewis, and I think it's quite a nice one. George Russell in his Mercedes branded t-shirt. George has officially joined the team as a full-time driver this year. George is a great person to photograph. He's got kind of a blue steel about him. He looks like a 1950s catalog model. He just photographs very, very well. Kevin Magnussen in the Haas. Out in the far depths of the track, they have a lot of palm trees that they've covered in fairy lights. And I was trying to pan between the fairy lights and see if I could get a car and the fairy lights blurring together. And I think that this has kind of worked quite nicely here. It's just an extra element of interest to make the shot stand out a little bit more. Kevin had a phenomenal race. He wasn't due to be competing in Formula One this year. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Haas's Russian driver Nikita Mazepin lost his seat. Kevin Magnussen, who had raced for them in the past, was given the opportunity to come back. He took that opportunity with both hands and claimed fifth, which is phenomenal for a team that was probably the slowest car last year. Pierre Gasly's car broken down. This moment triggered a restart in the race. Pierre Gasly's car just stopped working. He had to come to a halt on the side of the track, and I got there just as he was getting out and got this photograph of the marshal trying to put out the fire and Pierre looking on a bit dejectedly. So this incident triggered a safety car. My plan before this incident happened was to start heading towards the paddock. I try and go to the paddock maybe 5 or 10 laps before the end of the race so I can be there to photograph the celebrations. As I was about to go, red flag came out and I saw Pierre stopping just up the hill. So I ran down there and I got there just as he was out of the car. There was a bit of fire and the marshals were putting out the fire. So this kind of changed my whole plan because now we have a safety car. That means that the cars are still going around the track, but they're going a lot slower. So it buys you a little bit more time, and there's going to be a restart. There's quite often a good chance of something interesting happening at a restart. So I had to scrap my plan and adapt to what was going on the track. If you remember the last race of last season, it was a similar situation. We had an incident, there was a safety car on track. Max used that opportunity to jump Lewis and win the world championship. And I felt that this situation was playing itself out again. Charles had done really well during the race. He had kept off Max's attacks, but now there was an opportunity for Max to jump him at the start. I positioned myself at the exit of turn 1, knowing that if any incident was going to happen, that would be the best place to overtake. Luckily for Charles, he had the situation completely under control. As you can see in this photograph, he had built up quite a big gap between himself and Max. He would go on to hold that gap for the rest of the race. A lot of sports photography is about predicting what might happen. So putting yourself in a position where something could potentially be interesting. Photograph of Max Verstappen at the end of the race. Max was incredibly confident over the course of the weekend. He was on second place on the grid. He challenged for the lead of the race. At one point he was even leading the race, but unfortunately he had mechanical issues and wasn't able to finish. I think this photograph captures that sadness, that sorrow. He's tried so hard, he's put so much effort into it, he was doing really, really well, and then something out of his control happened and he wasn't able to achieve the results he was hoping for. I like the contrast between the bright lights and that sort of dark, bluish, melancholy look that he's got. Charles Leclerc celebrating winning the 2022 Bahrain Grand Prix. Ferrari haven't won a race since Singapore 2019. And even that race was quite an emotionally charged race for Charles because he'd won the previous 2 races. He was on track to win this one. But there was a mix-up in the pits and somehow Sebastian Vettel, his teammate, jumped him. Although the Ferrari as a team won, Charles was second, and I think he felt that it should have been his victory. Such an amazing moment of release and realization of all of that hard work, all of that commitment and dedication. They've been through so many difficult times over the past few years, and all of that is forgotten and taken away because they managed to achieve this race win.